is on the southeastern part of the country. I lived in Oregon, which is on the west coast, right in the middle of the country. And it came in, two mites came. One first was the trachea mite, and then later came the Varroa mite. And they tried to stop both of them, absolutely unsuccessful. They killed colonies, they put people out of business, and after a while, they just threw up their hands and said, "There's nothing we can do about this. Y'all are on your own." And I don't know that they're going to be able to stop this thing. My past experience is that there's just no way. I don't know how they're going to do it.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we'll talk about that. So how about we do just a quick little introduction,
Sure.
Bob? I'll do the introduction, and Dan's got some questions. Thank you so much. So we got Dan. So Dan's from Aussie Curlis Apiaries up in Queensland in near Toowoomba. And we've got Bob. And Bob, so you're Blue Ridge Honeyco in Lakemont, Georgia. How's that for an accent?
Yes. How many people are watching this?
Oh, so this will be. We've got none at the moment. It's going to go live, but we're going to have lots. So lots will come on to this. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So this, okay, I got it now. I thought maybe it was just a conversation between us, but that's fine. Whatever you got.
It's recorded, so yeah. So it's all recorded. So we'll get this out there. So maybe introduction, Bob. So how did it all start with you in regards to bees and beekeeping and your journey?
I read a book and got very intrigued and decided that it was something I thought I might like to do for a living. And in 1981, I was introduced to a commercial beekeeper in Oregon and went to work for him. And he had 2,200 colonies, and he was a honey producer and a pollinator. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the almond industry in California. We would start our season in California pollinating almonds, and then we would move back up to Oregon and pollinate pears in the southern Oregon part of the country. And then we would move up to Washington State, which is in the northwest part of the country, and we would pollinate apples. And then we would move on to North Dakota, which at that time was a very high honey production state. Not quite so much anymore. They're starting to grow a lot of corn and soybeans and things like that. And it's really kind of declined. At one time, North Dakota was the number one honey producing state in our country, and I don't think it is that way anymore. But anyway, that was way back in the 80s, and I moved to Georgia, which is in the southeastern part of our country, in 1991. And since I moved here, my livelihood has been primarily honey production, honey packing, and then making bees to sell in the form of packages and nucleus colonies. And here recently, I started to actually sell whole colonies, gone into selling hundreds of colonies in the fall. Sometimes beekeepers from around the country need more bees to help meet their contracts for the almonds in February, and that's been a big part of my ability to sell bees. And oddly enough, one of the reasons that happens is because if the Varroa mites get ahead of them and they don't treat properly, going into winter, they can lose colonies, and then suddenly they find themselves needing more colonies to meet their contracts. I know that you're below the equator and our dates are completely different, but in this country, it's extremely important to treat for Varroa mites around the 1st of August. You could do the calculations and figure out what month that would be for you. And the idea is that you don't want to treat the bees that are going into winter. You want to treat the bees that are going to raise the winter bees. And for us, that happens around the 1st of August, because by the 1st of September, the following month, our colonies are already beginning to lay eggs and establish a brood nest that is going to be creating the bees that have to make it through winter. Keith Delaplane from the University of Georgia, here in Athens, Georgia, did a study a long time ago. He took several different dates for treating colonies for Varroa mite across the year, spring, summer, fall, winter. And he found that the date 1st of August gave him the strongest and the healthiest colonies coming out of spring. And it all makes sense if you go back to that concept of treating the colonies, before they're raising the winter bees. I think that's very important. And then something else I do these days is in midwinter, when the bees are broodless, And I know in parts of your country, you probably don't have a broodless period. Other parts may. But if you can catch the bees when they're broodless, we use oxalic vaporization, which is extremely effective on broodless colonies, but not very effective on colonies that have brood, because it only kills the phoretic mites, or in other words, the mites that are on the bees. So we do that in winter. We do it twice. Oxalic vaporization in the end of November and early December, which is kind of early to midwinter for us. And then we'll use something like Apivar, which has a chemical in it called amitraz, around the 1st of August. Or this year and last year, I'm using a product called Apigard, which is a thymol-based gel. And that's very effective, but it's also very temperature sensitive. If you have very high temperatures, it's a little tricky. You have to use it in half doses closer together. For instance, if it's, I don't know if you guys use Fahrenheit or Celsius for temperatures, but 80 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit is about the ceiling for giving them a full dose, which is 50 milliliters or 50 grams of Apigard. And if it gets hotter than that, we cut the dose in half and do it closer together. We give them a half dose 1 week apart, 4 weeks in a row. And that's effective, actually, whether it's hot or not, that works. And if you get up into the high 80s, especially in the 90s, a full dose is just too much, and it overwhelms the colonies, and the bees exit the box. I had that happen the first time I used it, and I really kind of wasted 300 colonies. In the old days, the directions said you could use it into the 90-degree range, and which wasn't correct with a full dose. You have to use half doses when you're into those kind of temperatures. It's effective, and the thymol in Apigard also has, it's also somewhat of an antiseptic or an antimicrobial situation. And if you have minor brood issues, sometimes it'll help clean that up. You'll find thymol in things like toothpaste and mouthwashes and things like that. So it has some properties that are very helpful to the colonies, even, mites aside. And it will shut the queen down. It will either slow her way down or shut her down completely while those fumes are in the colony. And you have to be aware of that. Now, our colonies are naturally slowing down and shutting down right now, and we'll kind of be in a slow mode through the month of August because we have a pollen dearth. So it's a really good time to get our mite treatments done because the colonies are slowed down anyway. And then when you're done with that thymol treatment and it's all out of there, the bees will then start rearing brood in earnest, and the colonies will appear like a brand new queen that has just started laying in a broodless colony. You have these nice sheets of brood, and you can tell it's just like a brand new queen that's starting to lay. There's no old brood in the colony. So they also have somewhat of a brood break, which is a pretty healthy thing too. So that's I've used Apigard off and on for probably 20 years. There was a time when I made my own recipe. It's not hard to figure out how to do it on your own, but these days I just buy the manufactured product because it's just simpler. And I also get dealership pricing through Man Lake and Date Amp. Those are two big the beekeeping supply distribution companies in this country. So now that I get that discounted price, I find it's just simpler to buy the real thing and not have to put the labor into making my own. Now, the chemical in Apivar is amitraz, and I know in different countries around the world they have different products that use that chemical, and it's effective. It's been being used a long time in Europe and now in this country. Some colonies here are showing just a little bit of a minor resistance, the mite resistance to that chemical amitraz. Some commercial beekeepers here buy amitraz in other forms and make up their own concoction. Of course, that's against the law, so I can't recommend that to anybody. But I'm sure there's recipes out on the internet that's not hard to figure that out. And I would say over 3/4 of the large commercial beekeepers in this country actually do that. They make their own treatments. They find products that have amitraz in them and make up their own stuff. When I do it, I just use the Apivar strip and I stay legal. I'm kind of above the radar. I don't need to be doing illegal things because you can be fined and you can get in trouble. although I think the government knows that most commercial beekeepers are doing it and they just kind of look the other way. I have heard of a couple guys getting fined for it. So maybe that was just to let people know that, the government is paying attention. I don't know. But there's, and then let's see, there was a product not long ago, maybe 2 decades ago, called Apistan that had the chemical in it called fluvalinate. And fluvalinate was very effective for a few years, and then the mites became resistant to it pretty quickly. I would recommend to anybody listening not to use fluvalinate products because it has an extremely long half-life and it migrates to the wax and it will stay in your comb for a very long time, decades actually. And one of the problems with fluvalinate is it doesn't play well with other chemicals. So if you have it in your wax, and for instance, and you pollinate almonds in this country, they use a fungicide called pristine on the almonds a lot. And if fluvalinate and pristine come in contact with each other, although both of them show very low toxicity to bees on their own, when they touch each other, the result is 10 to 20 times more toxic. So that's one of the reasons I don't recommend using fluvalinate. One, because it has such a long half-life, and the other because it doesn't play well with other chemicals. There's a lot of people in this country are using essential oils like tea tree oil and wintergreen and spearmint and things like that to combat mites, but the results are kind of iffy. It's some people say they have good luck with it, others say it's not working very well. So essential oils is kind of tricky to be using for Varroa mites. They help with other things. They help with brood issues like European foul brood, and some of them help with nosema. But when it comes to mites, I would not bet the farm on using essential oils. I would play with it, maybe with a few colonies, and see if you're getting the proper results. I don't know if the mites that have moved into the country, into Australia, are the same mites that we have. I mean, there's some different varieties of these mites. So I don't
It's
know.
interesting you say that. Sorry to cut you off there, Bob, but it's interesting you say that because we've just found out that they're from the Korean genetics.
Korean. Okay. What do they call it? Do they call it See, it's Jacob Sani, and then another was called Destructor.
Destructor, yeah.
Destructor. That is what we have. So you have the same mite we have then. So
Yeah.
they should be sensitive to everything I just listed for you. Apivar is expensive. At least it is in this country. I used it 3 years ago, and my Apivar bill was $18,000 US. I don't know how our money compares, but it's not cheap.
Wow.
I think part of that is that in this country, sometimes we get beat up on chemical and medicine prices. I don't know why that is. Sometimes you can see the same thing in Mexico or South America for 25% of the price that we're paying here. I don't know why. I don't know what would happen in Australia if you brought those products in there, whether the price would go up or down. But in the US, Apivar is extremely expensive. And Apigard is, for the way I use it, is less expensive than Apivar. Apigard being the thymol product I mentioned.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So before Dan just jumps into some questions, unless Dan, do you want to paint the picture as to what's happened with our Varroa mite incursion? Would you like me to do it?
Yeah, you can do it, Ben.
Yes, yeah. So I'll just quickly paint the picture, Bob, and then and Dan's got some really good questions. But so it'll be approximately a month ago that we've had some mites were detected in some sentinel hives, which was set up in the port of Newcastle. Since then, it's been detected there's been a lot of mites actually in a commercial apiary, and there's been 41 sites as of yesterday which have been detected. Now, there's hundreds of people working on this. When I say hundreds, there's over 400 people. It's like almost they're working on the same facilities as we have natural disasters like fire and floods. I'm hearing mixed reports that they're going to contain it. I'm talking to some people on the ground in amongst it, but to my knowledge, there's been no country where the Varroa destructor has landed and able to be eradicated. So that's where we've got some good questions because we don't know anything about it. We've been living this last 200 years. It marks this year marks exactly 200 years since bees have successfully come to Australia. We've been living the dream as far as beekeeping, and this has rattled everyone. So that's why we appreciate your expertise, Bob. So that's a bit of a picture in regards to that.
Well,
Too
good
good,
luck
too
with
long.
that. Good luck. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's been interesting. So Dan, so questions. I think you had a few really interesting sort of ones to ask Bob.
There was a beekeeper down around the Newcastle area contained 50 plus mites on a frame. And what is your sort of thoughts on finding that sort of high number on?
Well, we don't measure them by the frame. We measure them by the percentage of mites on the bees. We use alcohol washes. We call it an alcohol wash. I think some people are coming up with other concoctions that work. I'm familiar with the alcohol. We will take a container with a bowl or a screen in it and put 300 bees in it, which is about a half a cup. And we have alcohol in that, and we'll shake it. And alcohol will remove all the mites from the bees, and then we'll let the alcohol settle through the screen, and we can count the mites that are in the bottom of the jar. And if we have more than 3, would be a 1% infestation. Anything over 1% is considered worth looking at. Where the colonies begin to get viruses and issues tends to start happening at higher percentages, like maybe 2, 3, 4, 5%. I watched some colonies today, and we were coming up with some 8s and 10s. So, I'm getting to the point where it's time to treat right now, which is normal because we're coming up on the 1st of August, which is, the proper time for us to treat. That's how we measure mites. I don't know how to measure them on a frame.
That's what they sort of mentioned on, sort of had that sort of high sort of count on the frame when they did the alcohol wash on it. It was sort of really.
So you are using alcohol washes and going by percentages.
Is that the best, Bob? Because I've just got someone asked a question, checking for mite, sugar shake, drone uncapping, or alcohol wash. Do you find alcohol wash is the best?
Would I define?
Sorry, the alcohol wash method. Would that be the best way of counting mites in that percentage?
That's what I'm told. I guess I'm not a researcher. I'm not an expert on all the ways you can count mites. I don't like counting mites on a sticky sheet under the bottom board, like a screen bottom board. You can put a sticky sheet on there and count the mite drop. Because the reason that's not considered accurate is because you need to know exactly how many bees are in the colony before you can do an assessment as to what your mite population percentage is. So I don't use sticky sheets. Sugar methods. Some people say it works really good. I have a researcher friend at UGA's that says it's not accurate, and I'm not sure anything is perfect, but the industry standard right now in this country is the alcohol wash, and you can do it several ways. If you want to make a homemade device, you can take 2 jars facing each other, and you can glue the lids together with a stainless steel screen, like a window screen type of screen in between. And you can put your alcohol in one jar and put your 300 bees and shake it vigorously for about 60 seconds and then turn it upside down, and the mites and the alcohol go through the screen into the jar below, but the bees stay above. Then you can hold it up and look at the bottom of the jar and count the mites. I don't remember if there's a certain size screen that is appropriate. The ones we're using now are called Easy Check, Easy Mite Check. What is it called? It's actually a commercially available thing, and since that came online, people have kind of quit making their own because this device is just simple and it's on the store shelf. I think it's called an Easy Check or something like that. Wish I knew the name of it. We sell them in our store. I should know. You can see them online. It's yellow. It's a yellow clear bowl, very easy to use.
And like with the like the treatment, but you're just sort of talking about the treatment wise, and like it's been winter here in Australia. How we're sort of having the high mite counts now, and they think they've sort of eradicated it to a degree now. What in say in our spring to early summer, is it something what could sort of come back and be back in the
Yes.
how far does the mite sort of spread?
It can be misleading in the spring because when the bees are full of brood in the spring and your mite count is a little low, all the mites get in the brood. So you can do these alcohol washes and come up with a relatively low count because obviously it's only counting the mites on the bees. And at any given time, you might have somewhere in the area of 20% of the mites in the colony on the bees. And then as the season progresses, like we're going through it right now, and this is another reason for us treating around the 1st of August is so important. Our brood nests are shrinking quickly and dramatically because we have very little pollen coming in. Our main honey flows have just ended. We were splitting some bees today in colonies that had 7 or 8 or 9 good solid sheets of brood just 3 weeks ago are now down to 3 or 4 sheets of brood. So you suddenly have a lot less brood, but the mite population is still growing quite rapidly, and it does all summer long. And the bees and the mites kind of grow together through the early summer, but in late summer, just the opposite happens. The mite numbers continue to explode while the brood that they can enter starts to diminish. And suddenly a colony that might have had a count of 1% just 3 or 4 weeks ago now suddenly has 3 or 4 or 5%. So it's a dangerous time. It can be very misleading in the spring. We do mite counts in the month of May, which is my head won't wrap around this.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Quite come up with the right month, but we do. We check our colonies pretty good in the month of April and May to make sure we don't have any issues before we start putting our honey supers on. Because once you put your honey supers on, it's more difficult to treat, and some things you can't, or it's unlawful to apply when your honey supers are on. So we want to know we're going into summer in pretty good shape, and we'll have a lot of zeros and very few ones. When I say zeros, I mean like 1 or 0 mites in the bottom of the jar showing almost nothing. And then right now we're showing these 8s and 10s, like I mentioned. So that's what happens in just a few months. And it can be quite dramatic. It can really sneak up on you and surprise you. Another way that we use just to check very easily without actually using any type of device is in mid-spring when I use 2 brood boxes as my brood nest. And invariably, when you crack those boxes apart in mid-spring, you've got burr comb between the boxes that's full of drone larvae. And I'm sure it goes the same way for you guys. When you crack those 2 boxes apart and you see all that drone larva that just got exposed, if you see any mites at all, you've got a problem. We just started seeing mites in our drone brood not very long ago, just like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And you have to look fast. They're fast little critters. They'll move on real quick. You got about 3 seconds to look, and then they're gone. But that's all it takes. 3 seconds is quite long enough to crack that box open and look at that drone larva immediately, and you'll know if you got a mite load or not, or a heavy mite load or not. That works too.
Audio. With the when you sort of working your hives through, and you've just gone through and taken your honey supers off, and then you're going out to sort of do all that sort of treating. See what happens. What a lot of beekeepers do here in Australia is that they rotate. We've got a single hive, single brood chamber with a queen excluder, then a honey super. See, with being here in Australia, our sort of we go out to sort of places out to, like Western Queensland, which is a tree called Napunya, which is a lot of blokes go out there and work the honey florers out there. And is there going to be sort of times like if have a real bad outbreak of it, like down in like in Newcastle area? And is there going to be times there where we would used to be able to produce honey through winter time, where us Australians would sort of have to change our strategies around and use, say, a lot of sugar syrup as a tool to sort of get through our winter times because we've got a treat for Varroa? Yes.
If the question is, maybe you're asking, is there a time when you have to take your honey supers off so you can treat?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Up until lately, that's been sort of the thinking here. But there's in our country, they've just figured out that oxalic acid vaporization is okay with supers on. Oxalic acid already exists in honey in a small amount. And they've done some studies where they treated heavily with oxalic acid vaporization and found that the content of oxalic acid in the honey did not go up very much and is still well below what is considered acceptable. So you could use oxalic acid vaporization with supers on, keeping in mind that it only kills the mites on the bees, not in the brood. So you'd have to do it multiple times. And that would have some effect, maybe just enough effect to get you to the end of the honey flow. Another product that is okay to use with honey supers on, which I don't use, is formic acid. I'm not an expert on formic acid. I've had a few. It's legal. There are products around this country. One of them is called Formic Pro. That's one that's on the market. And I know a few people that like it and use it. But I don't. I'm just kind of going the thymol direction. So that's legal. You can put that on with honey supers too. You cannot put anything with amitraze or fluvalinate in it on when the honey super's on. That would be the, Apistan or Apivar products. I don't know about the thymol product. I would not want to put Apigard, which is thymol, on my colonies when there's honey supers on, because that thymol could probably make your honey not taste or smell so good.
Yeah.
I've never played with it. I don't know if it's legal or illegal to shut this off. I don't know if it's illegal or illegal to put Apigard on with honey supers, but I would just recommend not doing it.
Yeah.
Can I jump in? Sorry, Dan, you go.
I watched that last one there when you were at, was it the University of Georgia there with Jennifer Berry?
Yeah.
And I watched your 3 segments on that, and they were just sort of saying about the oxalic acid was because they were talking about 2 different treatments where you could use it in like a sugar syrup sort of treatment as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where what's the better, like the better effect on?
We call that the dribble method in this country, where you put oxalic acid in sugar syrup and dribble it on the bees. It's hard on the bees. The oxalic acid vaporization seems to have very little effect on the bees themselves. I mean, you can do it over and over and over, and the bees seem to be fine. I'm not sure what an overdose is, to be real honest. And I've done the dribble. I did the dribble 3 winters in a row, and it's effective. But if you do it twice, you see that your colony, the bee numbers in your colony kind of dwindle a bit. It's obviously hard on the bees, and they recommend only doing it once in winter, where with the vaporization, it seems like you can do it over and over and over without any ill effect. So I would recommend not using the dribble, because why would you if you can do the vaporization? The disadvantage to the vaporization, there's a couple. One, you have to use a respirator unless you're just doing a couple colonies and you can keep, upwind or something. And you have to have these devices for heating it. And for somebody that's just got 2 or 3 colonies, that might be some money they don't want to spend. If you got 100, 500, 1,000 colonies, it's absolutely worth the investment to get this equipment. There's new vaporizers coming out, seems like monthly. Somebody else has got a new tool on the market. We've used one called ProVap 110. We have those that we've used in the past. Now we're using something called the VM Turbo Vaporizer, which is difficult to use, but it's very fast. I think Lore Bees, if I'm pronouncing that right, has just come out with a new unit that looks like it works quite well. And I
Yeah.
even got a comment from somebody in Australia that has ordered one. And uh, I guess you guys are going to have to. I honestly don't think you're going to stop this thing. I'm not an expert. I'm not a researcher. I'm not part of the crowd that's trying to stop it. But watching what happened in this country, I'll be surprised if you can stop it. You guys are
Yeah.
doing a really good thing here by trying to get educated ahead of the game before you got it in your apiary. And you might even go so far as to start researching just exactly where you're going to get this stuff in a hurry once it shows
Yeah.
up. Because if you got a high mite count suddenly, you don't want to wait 3 weeks for a tool to come from Europe or America or somewhere else. The tables could turn on you that fast. You could go from a high mite count to a sick colony just in weeks. And
Yeah.
these varroa mites vector viruses. They say it's not the varroa mite doing the damage on the bee as much as it is that they weaken the bee's immune system and make the bee so much more susceptible to the viruses and issues that already exist in the colony.
Yeah.
And a lot of this stuff's already there, but once the bees are compromised in some way, which the varroa mites do, then suddenly the bees are much more susceptible to all this stuff that's they can come down with. So
Yeah.
you don't want to wait 3 weeks or 4 weeks for something to come in the mail. I would figure out where you can get it now, because my guess is your turn's coming.
Yeah.
That's good advice. That is. I'll just quickly jump in and ask a question, if that's okay, Dan.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine.
As far as treatment-free beekeeping, so what's your take on that, Bob?
I've done some treatment-free beekeeping. I've had a couple yards that I went for a long time, 7 years without treatment. There's some pros and well, the problem with treatment-free beekeeping is if you have other beekeepers around you, even just in a minimal way, it makes it much harder because let's see, I got to back up here. It's not just about having bees that are mite resistant. If you don't treat a yard of bees, let me tell you how it went for me. I had these yards and I just quit treating them, just went cold turkey. And the first year I lost most of them. And then I split from the survivors, and the next year I still lost a lot. But after 3 or 4 years of splitting from colonies that were inside that yard, I started having more and more that were making it through the winter and surviving. And my belief is it's not just about creating mite resistant bees, it's that when you stop treating, suddenly you aren't creating a super mite anymore. When you kill 95% of the mites in your apiary with a chemical, the 5% that survived are turning into something bigger, or I should say worse than the ones that perished. So once you stop treating, you are no longer breeding for a super mite, so to speak. And so you're creating a bee that is more resistant, but at the same time, you're creating a mite that is less virulent. And the two have to go together. And if you have other beekeepers around you where your bees can be exposed to other mites that are not going through what you're doing, it's tough because you're bringing this other stuff home. And that happened to me after 7 years of creating a line of bees. At first I thought it was the bees that were all that doing all this work and getting better and better. And then I had a beekeeper move in to about 300 yards from one of my yards, and he didn't treat properly, and he lost most of his colonies that winter due to a heavy mite load. And by the next spring, I'd lost every single one of my colonies because they succumbed to this mite that he had in his colonies. I'm sure my bees went over there and robbed his colonies out because they were only 300 yards away. Why wouldn't they? And then they brought home this mite that he had that had not been going through the regimen that mine had, and they succumbed in short order. So you need to be a little bit isolated. And that's important if you're going to go treatment free, and just be willing to do the work, because at first you're going to lose some colonies. Now you might be in a unique situation there because so far, if you haven't been treating for mites, you might not have. I'm using the term super mite that's been bred already. Of course, that depends on where this mite came from, where it originated before it got to your country. but you might actually have, if you're willing to take the beating and lose most of your colonies, you might want to go that route and just let everything kind of grow together and evolve. We could use the word evolve together. You might have good luck with that, but be prepared to lose some colonies at first, because it'll happen.
Yeah. And the well, with the breeding, with the different breeds of bees over there, I know you run a Caucasian / Colonian line.
Yeah. They are not the most mite resistant bees. Over here, the colonies, the bees that are starting to get some notice are VSH, Varroa sensitive hygiene. Some guys are breeding for that, but again, if your bees are out mating with somebody else's bees, you could lose those genetics very easily. Again, you need to be somewhat isolated so you can keep that stock going pretty good. The Russian bees are touted as being somewhat mite resistant, but again, they have to be isolated. And I ran Russian bees for about 4 years, had 400 colonies of them, and I came to really dislike them because they were quite a bit more fiery, I should say, angry bees.
Yeah.
I didn't like them. And then they also swarm a lot. And I finally, one year, they swarmed on me tremendously, and I just said enough of this, and I switched back to carniolan bees. Russian bees are not a separate race. Many people don't understand that. They really are carniolan bees that evolved in Russia. They started out as a carniolan bee that was imported into Russia, but they've just simply been evolving in that country with the Varroa mites much longer than the bees in our country or your country, of course.
Yeah.
And so they have a little bit, they built some mechanisms for helping with the Varroa mites. But over here, even the people that are breeding them that are honest will tell you that they're not a silver bullet. And so there's a lot of people. I think genetics, honestly, is the future. I mean, that's the answer to this whole thing.
Yeah.
But it's hard to just let all your bees die and breed from a few survivors at first.
Yeah.
That's hard to do.
Yeah.
And you guys are going to run into the same thing.
Because I've run a lot of Italians, because that's sort of the majority of the market here in Australia.
Yeah, they're going to you're going to have trouble with those. I'll tell you, for a few years, this country was allowing Australian packages to come in here to help pollinate almonds in California because there was a little bit of shortage of bees for a few years. And they found that the Australian bees arrived healthy and nice, but they succumbed to all kinds of issues in short order. I'm sure it had to do with some of the viruses and, of course, the mites for sure. They didn't deal with that well at all. The Australian bees did not do well here.
Yeah.
Because they didn't evolve with all this stuff at all. Even though we're still having to treat and do all this work to keep our bees going, I'm pretty sure that there's been some evolution that's occurred in this country. Our bees that got hit with the mites at first, it just wiped everybody out. And the people that did not get a handle on the treatment regimen, they were wiped out. And but now, there's a little more, what would be the right word? There's a little more flexibility with the mites than there was right at first. And you guys you're about to hit a brick wall. And there's going to be some evolution happen in your bees too. But because the Australian bees were reported as doing poorly here, I think that you guys are going to have some trouble at first.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the different, would there be sort of, because I'm with our buyers here in Australia, they sort of want bees early and earlier every year.
Yeah, of course.
And Ben goes to the Armours and he calls me up and goes, Dan, I put some early queens, and the only way to sort of do that is have the Italian line in there.
Yeah.
And is what, because when you're producing queens on a sort of, I notice you sort of have them in a 5-frame nute box, and you've got because I watched one of the segments of when you were in Florida with Chris Werner, how he was running a 10-frame box with 3 individual dividers there, and one of the things is he gets 2 or 3 rounds of bees out of there, then he takes them off for sort of honey production. Is that something he sort of had to do over the time as producing queens because of the mite, or was there just a small scale of a window for the market for queens?
It was that the latter. It was a business model decision on his part. He first brought his bees down from Wisconsin, which is a northern state, to Florida just for the better overwintering, just strictly to get his colonies through the winter, because it can be pretty cold and brutal up there. And he hit upon this raising queens as a generating income. And I just talked to him a couple of days ago. He saw my video where I mentioned that I might start trying to produce more honey and split a little less. And his response was a little interesting. He said, "You might be careful with that." He uses producing nukes and queens as a surefire way of making money, just like I have been producing bees. As I said in that video, for a surefire way of making money, even in a bad honey production year, at least you've made some money. And that's why he's doing that. It's strictly a business decision.
Yeah. And there was one of the comments he made on there about, he was talking about a mite bite. Just give us a little bit more of a detail on what a mite bite is on a bee.
Well, it would be like a rat chewing a hole in you.
Yep.
I don't know how else to describe it. Just picture a rat taking a bite out of you.
Yep.
And the disease and the stuff that could be vectored in that situation. It's a pretty good example. It's a pretty good comparison.
Yeah.
And I know in one of his videos, he mentioned using some essential oils to try to soothe that mite bite area. And I don't know enough to say one way or another. It makes sense. Chris Werner is a pretty smart beekeeper. When he talks, I listen. And I know I got some comments on the YouTube video about him using his essential oils in those comments. And some people kind of poo-pooed it and didn't think there was anything of real value in his comments. But he's got a lot of experience, and he's very well read, very well educated. And if he's doing something, I would at least listen. I wouldn't just discount anything he says. And I'm about to put a towel on our colonies right ahead of Apigard. We're going to give all of our colonies it's like a blue shop towel. It's like a heavy duty paper towel that you can soak in oil or whatever. And I'm going to give all my colonies one of those towels soaked in tea tree oil with canola oil, and give them that. Start them out. I'm starting my mite treatments with that tea tree oil treatment. Just kind of I think it's the right thing to do. Highly antiseptic, antimicrobial, and then within days start to back it up with this Apigard treatment. So that's going to be our approach this year.
How do you put that in the hive there, Bob? The actual that formula on those blue cloths?
Well, we actually take, the roll. If I can show my hands in the screen, it's bigger than that. It's like a roll of paper towels, but it's shop towels, something you'd see in an auto repair shop or in a hardware store. It's a very heavy duty paper towel. And in this country, they're blue, so we just call them blue towels. And we actually put the roll on a saw and cut the roll in half, so you've got 2 rolls. And then we take canola oil, and I'm about to tell you something that is really off-label. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say this stuff. What the heck? I don't think I'm going to get thrown in jail. But you take a gallon of canola oil or vegetable oil of some sort, and you put 400 milliliters of tea tree oil in there and stir real good. And 4 of those half rolls will absorb all of that. And a roll here has 55 sheets on it. So when we cut it in half, we now have 110 sheets. And we'll take 4 of those. So we're putting 440 sheets in a the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket and putting this mixture in there, and it soaks it all up. In years past, I don't know what you all do there, but in years past, big, large commercial beekeepers use terramycin or oxytetracycline in powdered sugar on their colonies, just to kind of keep European foul brood and American foul brood from showing up in our colonies. If you treated them with that, you'd never see any of that stuff. And I did that. I was one of those people that was guilty of doing that, for better or for worse. And nowadays I'm using the tea tree oil. And Chris actually in that video talked about using tea tree oil and eucalyptus and what was the other one? I forget the third one, but we're mixing. We also put eucalyptus in there sometimes too. And that's just my version of trying to give them not an antibiotic, but just kind of helps keep the brood cleaned up a little bit. And then we go ahead with our mite treatments.
Yeah.
And sorry, Bob, does that blue towel go on top of the frames?
Sorry, I didn't say that, did I? If it's a double deep, we just put it right in the middle. If it's a single, we just lay it on the top of the top bars. Now, when we start treating our bees for mites in the fall, if it's a single story, we build a 1.25 inch rim that creates kind of an empty void above the top bars. And that gives us room to put the Apigard in there, which needs a little bit of space, or these towels. And I also use these rims when we're feeding pollen supplement patties. So we have these rims that we use. And they show up last year I did a video on how we apply Apigard, and those rims show up in that video. They're real simple. Any wood that's an 1.25 inch high, you can make a rim. And we'll give them that towel on a single and then put that rim on it so the bees can crawl all around the towel, underneath and top and everything.
And do they chew the towel, Bob? Do they chew it up and spit it out the front?
They do chew it up. Some colonies will put propolis all around it, and some colonies chew it up and take it out of the entrance. It really doesn't matter. They're touching it. I mean, either way, they've got to touch that towel, whether they're tearing it up and taking it out or they're applying propolis all around it. Honestly, I've come to the conclusion that propolis is really good in a colony. I know a lot of people don't like to see it because it's a sticky mess, but there have been some recent research studies that are showing that, our breeding out propolis production has been a huge mistake, that colonies that have a high amount of propolis in them are a little more resistant to American foul brood, European foul brood, and chalk brood, and many other things. I don't know how many of those things you have in your country. But propolis is a good thing, and that's one of the reasons I'm getting into the Caucasian bees, because they are not afraid to use propolis. Trust me. In some colonies, it's just lathered in there. It's terrible, but I feel good about it. I feel like it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Chris Werner, whom you mentioned, actually saves a lot of propolis. He'll scrape down propolis off his hide bodies and lids and save it. And he'll grind it up into a powder and add it to his pollen supplement patties in the early spring because of the antimicrobial products that you find in propolis. He's a big advocate of that, and I'm with him. I've pondered doing that too. The only difference between him and I is that I don't use pollen supplement patties very often, whereas he uses them a lot in the spring because he's trying to fire up early to create early queen mating nukes. He has to start real early, much like the situation you're describing, where if you're creating queens, you need to get your bees going really early. Chris used to be strictly a carniolan bee outfit, and he's had to put some Italian in there so he could have bees early enough to create queen mating nukes early on. Yep. And of course, in that one video, he blamed me for it. He said, "Well, you wanted these early queens, So yeah, he's right. Yeah, I think a really fine bee is Chris actually has a pretty good combination. He's got carniolan and Italian mixed in his outfit. That is a very good combination. He still gets bees early. It's like you get the best of both worlds. The carniolans are a little more frugal, and they will, and Caucasians too, they don't start rearing brood in midwinter just because the daylight is increasing. They tend to they like to wait a little longer and wait for a stimulus. if you got a pure carniolan colony, they almost want to wait till pollen starts coming in. Of course, you can use pollen supplement patties and sugar syrup to accomplish that, but there's nothing like real pollen. Honestly, nothing stimulates like real pollen coming in the door. So Chris had to start putting some Italian in his bees to just get those early bees. You guys might consider that too. I mean, he's doing fine with that cross, and a little bit of carniolan might go a long way over there. Your Italian bees, we have some pure Italian bees in this country too. And some of those Italian producers are trying to breed for hygienic behavior and mite resistance, but it shows up easier in the dark bees like carniolans and buckfast and Caucasians. One of the issues with Caucasians, and this may be an issue for you or not, is they are a little more susceptible to European foul brood. We have figured that out. Of course, we're dealing with that with the tea tree oil and the stuff like that. We try to, offset that. Do you guys have European foul brood in your country?
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
Yeah.
European, American foul brood.
Yeah, the carniolans do well with it, probably better than the Italians. But my experience is when I buy the southern Italian bee that's, produced around the south in this country, that they're more susceptible to these types of things. And when I started using carniolan bees, I saw some of those issues just completely disappear. I used to have a chalk brood issue from time to time. I don't know if you have that in that country, but when I switched from Italians to carniolans, my chalk brood issues completely disappeared, just went away like magic. And the Caucasians are very good. I haven't seen chalk brood in a decade now that I don't have it. I'm not pumping Italian genetics into my outfit anymore, and the chalk brood just disappeared. But I'd still do occasionally see European foul brood, and that's not just Caucasians. Italians are more susceptible to that, I think, than the carniolans. I think as far as a tough bee, I think the carniolans of the three major races are probably the toughest, but you're not going to raise early queens with them because they overwinter with 4 frames of bees, and you think maybe they're not even going to make it through winter, and then somehow magically they build up so fast that they swarm with the rest right on time. So it's an interesting bee, the carniolan.
Yep.
It's interesting. Really appreciate your time, Bob. So Dan's got a couple more questions. Got a couple more questions?
Yeah, there's one here, the pros and cons of, I think we've already answered that one, and I've got the last of the natural beekeeping. There was, we sort of already got on to, answered that one. Well, I'm sort of well and truly sort of done, Ben.
That's been awesome. I suppose just wanted to say, just before we sort of come to the conclusion, Bob, just want to say really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome.
That's the information you've given us is really, I think, a couple of take-home things for us. We're hearing from many people, and especially from you tonight, is be prepared.
Be prepared. Yeah, it's coming. I'm sorry to tell you, but
we've had beekeeping too long, too good for too long.
Yeah. We've been. I shouldn't say. I got to say this carefully because I don't want to sound like I'm not being nice here, but we've been watching and waiting. Like, these guys are going to get this. They don't know what's coming. They don't know what's going to hit them. And we've been watching. It was just a matter of time,
Yeah.
So I feel sorry for you because I know what you're about to go through, but you have something that we didn't have. You have all this information out there. We didn't know any of this stuff when it hit us. We had to really learn the hard way, and Europe had it ahead of us, and of course, so we learned a little bit from them. But boy, we lost a lot of colonies learning the hard way. And you guys have so much information available on the internet that can help you kind of, not go down fast right at first. And I think you're going to do much better than the U.S. did at first. I hope you do.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
So I have a question for you. Yeah. You said you're recording this?
Yes. Yeah. So this is recording on a couple of platforms. So it's on a YouTube channel. So hopefully I've done it right and then I've recorded it properly, but it's also on a podcast as well. So we've got the audio.
Would you be interested in my posting this on my channel?
Oh, please. Please,
Okay.
that'd be amazing, Bob. It'd be an absolute pleasure.
I need to get it somehow, get a clean copy from you. I don't know how. I'm not very tech savvy. We're gonna have to
Neither
figure
am I.
that out. So when this is all over, maybe we can email back and forth and figure out how we can accomplish that.
That sounds good. It's
If you have any good ideas, let me know. We can't just send a thumb drive in the mail from Australia.
That's true. No, that's absolute brilliant presentation, Bob, and thanks Dan as well for those really awesome questions, and really appreciate your time. So maybe how about we'll in 1 year's time from today, let's have another chat if that's okay.
That would be cool.
And we can have a chat and we can sort of touch base on some notes and maybe give us some bit more advice and see how it's all happening.
I would like that. I'd like to hear how you're doing from you, not rumors through the magazines and stuff. I'd like to hear what you guys got to say.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting times because Australia, like America, is a very big continent, very big. So there's some interesting things happening where state by state there's some very strict quarantine measures already been put in place. So it'll be very interesting times to see what happens.
Yeah. Well, good luck. I hope you do well. I really do. And good luck. And we'll email back and forth, and I'll contact you real soon, trying to figure out how to get a copy of this, and keep me informed. I'd like to know how you guys are doing.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bob.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Take care. All the best. See you, Dan. Take care. Bye for now.
See you, mate. Bye.
Bye.